We're started.
We're live. So welcome everyone to Ins and Outs of Social Learning. This is my colleague, Dr. Julie Kane, Chief Learning Officer. I just realized I spelled Chief wrong. Chief Learning Officer.
Luckily, no one can see your notes.
Here to participate. Mark Otter would participate as well. Julie and I literally just drove down from the mountains.
We're wearing matching vests. It's our mountain gear.
It's our mountain attire. Because last week we were in Miami, we were both dressed as dolphins. We were. I'm happy today. This is a great one. So today we're going to be chatting with Neesha Rahim, CEO of BitSpace, longtime friend of Participate. We're going to discuss how BitSpace is combining online learning communities with Maker Education and is powered to inspire students to create. Prior to her work at BitSpace, Neesha co-founded Level Up Village, a global STEAM mentoring program that connects students around the world. We're going to talk to Neesha today about how she has seen EdTech as a long-time person in tech, how she's seen it change throughout the years, what's on the horizon in the education sector and beyond. But Neesha, so good to see you today. Welcome.
Good to see you too. I'm really happy to be here. It's nice to especially be with you too, since we met during my Level Up Village days, and it's really exciting to be able to be here with you.
Yeah, and I may have to at some point in the conversation even have you talk about the stuff that you had started with Tutor Chat, because I think again I really would love to get kind of your insights into EdTech, where you think things are going. So we'll do a little segment later about that. But yeah, I think let's get started.
Yeah. So I think, just we'll dive into a little bit of background about you, Neesha, but I remember reading an article a while back and I went looking for the quote. And there was a quote from your mother that said, "Everything can be taken from you except your education." And I just always, that stuck out in my mind, that quote. So love to hear about your background, how that quote has influenced the fantastic work you've been doing across these multiple organizations. And then we'll jump into what you're working on today.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. I can't believe you found that quote. That's from
I know, that's great.
Like steel box.
It's there. So my mom actually, my mom was born and brought up in Kenya, and she grew up with a lot of wealth, and is the second to youngest of 10 kids, and crazy huge family. And there was a lot of uprising happening in Kenya, and she basically left the country, snuck out of the country with a suitcase and a little bit of money, and went to college in India, and then she came to the US. She went to pharmacy school in Atlanta, and she literally showed up with a suitcase and a little bit of money and no real skills that are helpful, I guess, aside from her own drive, which was clearly very helpful. She was the dean of her pharmacy school and basically said, "All right, now what?" And didn't know how to make a bed. She didn't know how to make a pot of tea. People did this stuff for her, and really had nothing. And the dean kind of went, "Oh, okay, you need a job." And so she studied, she went to pharmacy school, she studied, everything was taken away from her family. Like, I think, very, very small pockets of any kind of money was left. Everybody left, except for one aunt who stayed in Kenya. And so that's what I grew up with, is that story. And my mom saying over and over again, her and her younger brother are the only ones that had a college education. They both went on to pharmacy school, and they both did very well for themselves and brought the rest of their family either to the U.S. or to England, and some of my family's in Australia. But anyway, this narrative of everything can be taken away from you, but if you have your education, you will be fine, has been in my ear since I don't know when, earliest memories. So it's funny that you brought that up, and that definitely has been part of my own move into the education space. I started out in the nonprofit world, but really the thing that got me always was working with youth development organizations. And I'd say that North Star has always been, my North Star has always been democratizing access to high quality education opportunities that's taken different forms as I've kind of gone along, but that's sort of been that same common denominator, I'd say, in most everything. Yeah, and I got my dream job working at a place called Seeds of Peace that did still does conflict resolution amongst youth for the biggest groups that we worked with were the Israelis and the Palestinians, and really saw these kids come together. The transformative moment there was we're sitting in these sessions where you have kids in the U.S. that have come from Israel and the Palestinian territories. And you have a facilitator sitting there, and the facilitator's got them talking and clearly knows the drill, has done this a lot of times, has asked them both to bring their textbooks. And, she's gotten them into a conversation that is clearly volatile. And they're both saying, things that are very conflicting with each other about their own histories. This land was given to us. No, it wasn't. You took it. And so that was the narrative that was going back and forth. And they said, the facilitator stopped them and said, take your textbooks out. She took the kids took the textbooks out, and she's like, flip two, now trade. And they both read their textbooks, they looked up at each other and they went, you've been lied to. Both of them said, you've been lied to each other. And again, with this whole idea of democratizing access to high quality education, right? Those critical thinking skills, the ability to, and I get it, there are all kinds of things in that situation that would prevent someone from being able to have access to information. But it struck me again that, whoa, this is all about how they've been educated, what they deem to be truth. And that led to Level Up Village. So in this like really kind of crazy way around the conflict resolution and kids sitting together that wouldn't normally sit together at the same table, as well as this drive inside of me. At that time, when Level Up Village started, I still had to explain what STEM stood for, even to superintendents of school, what STEM stood for. I think nobody has said this to me otherwise. So I think that this is still true. I think we were the first people to use 3D printers with kids in an after school setting ever. And that only came about because a friend of mine that was at MakerBot literally saw what we were doing, trying to bring STEM into the after school system and create global competencies around STEM, and just dropped a 3D printer on my table and said, I think you should do something with this. And I went, no, I'm not even handy. No, I don't want to do this, And he said, no, you can't. Just play with it. And I said, I'm going to break it. He said, so break it. And but I don't care about this. And he said, I think you should, and that's how our most popular class came from there. So, sorry, I've meandered a bit.
No, that's really perfect, because I think it's interesting. It's just interesting that you're saying around the quality education piece, because this issue around curriculum and the kind of access to specific curriculum. And I think given our just even current political environment, there was a recent article about textbooks, the same textbook, right, Pearson? Right. So you saw that, like, what's the narrative in California versus what's in Texas, which is, we're really in the thick of it down here, even in the South, around who gets to tell that story. Whose story is it? How do kids sort of enter into this conversation and sort of have visibility into the fact that this is really contested territory? And I do love the fact that you're not handy. We're going to come back to that, because when we get into the makerspace, that is the irony of all time. You're like,
not even close. The thing that I said to people when they would, and at that time when we would say, anything. I'm looking for a teacher for coding. I'm looking for a teacher to build websites, looking for a teacher for 3D printing. Literally teachers that maybe even were teaching technology of some sort would physically back up for me like this.
Yeah.
When I start talking. And I'd say, wait, okay, look, I can't draw a stick figure. I can't hang up a shelf. Well, maybe if I tried, I probably could have with a YouTube video or something, maybe now. But I did this. You could do this. Anybody could do this. If I could do it, you could do it. That was the thing, that it's still funny that I'm still not handy.
What I love that y'all did was you married this idea of STEM, and it really was one of the first time we'd heard like STEAM.
Yeah.
STEM and the arts, and then how we all came together as to global collaboration, this idea of global collaboration. And I just noticed that Eileen Winokur is on here as well.
Hey, Eileen.
Hi, Eileen from Kuwait. And there's that whole group of us that really kind of came together around this idea of global education, global collaboration. And even though we've kind of spun off in some different directions, it's still this really nice, tight community. Yeah. But to talk a little bit about how you connected STEAM, project problem-based learning to global collaboration.
So that just kind of was one of those things. So I love ideas. I love listening to people's ideas and sort of curating. I think I'm a good curator, actually. That's probably one of my best super skills. And so hearing what's happening in different parts of my life, and what was happening in my life was I saw my kids. They were very young at the time. They went to school in Greenwich. I mean, great school system, public school system. And yet still, I kind of was watching them go through school and become less and less and less curious. They said to me maybe one too many times, I'm bored. And I'm thinking, and I have two little boys, and they're really into like Legos and building and all this kind of stuff. And at the same time, you know, I have friends around me in high-tech fields, basically. And that's the kind of stuff that I read about. I just like reading about that kind of thing. And then my nonprofit work was in the global ed world. I was working with, at that time, a school in Rwanda, a couple of other clients as well, but at that time, a school in Rwanda for sure. And I just kept thinking, and then one more thing happened, which is we had some kids come over, and we were the only not finance people that lived around us that I knew, both my husband and I. And anyway, our house was a rental, it was kind of run down, whatever. I didn't really care. But we don't have an elevator in our house. And one of the kids said to my kids, your house is so boring. You don't have an elevator. And I thought,
oh my God. Greenwich.
It's not really all like that, but it did get my goat. And I thought, this is so interesting. I've taken my kids everywhere. One of the things that I've gotten from working with all kinds of organizations around the world is their grit. They're like watching them not sweat anything, really, and kind of go about life in this way that was just like so incredible, right? And so it was odd. All of these things were happening at once. And one thing that I thought was, I can take my kids all over the place, and I do, and they see some of the people that I work with, and they hear their stories, and they know. But the thing that is going to influence them the most is their peers. And so when Level Up started, it was a random idea that I pitched to my kid's first grade teacher as something that, you know, we could just do as a volunteer thing. And I said, hey, look, you guys are doing breaking down a process in literature, right? Like basically doing like a how do I break down any process? So how would you write a paper? How would you build a house? How would you, any of those kinds of things? And in Rwanda, those kids were doing exactly the same thing, but it was around a brick. How do you make a brick, actually? And I said, wouldn't it be great for them to like talk to each other, exchange with each other, and really around this idea of it's not enough for my kids to know what other kids are going through. They would have to hear it themselves and have their own experience, right? And their friends would have to have their own experience. So it was really like this odd way of me trying to combat the Greenwich thing in a way.
Yeah. Not to even interrupt here, because I want you to keep going, but I think often the exposure of kids in projects like these, we always talk about marginalized groups or kids who are kind of under-resourced in some way. And I think it's really interesting that the idea of collaboration and the idea of really sort of supporting kids who may be also in a situation of privilege, like how do you get them really interacting in the world from a good place, from an empathetic place, and that they're actually being poorly educated, right? In this very over-resourced space. Yeah. That they are actually undereducated in very significant ways, even more than potentially kids in more, again, under-resourced schools. So anyway.
And that was the other thing, is that on the other side, flip side of that equation was I'm watching how smart these kids are. Even, the kids that we were working with at the school in Rwanda were all orphans. And they had so much gumption and so much creativity in them. And I just kept thinking, I hope you don't take, nobody takes this the wrong way, but I was just thinking, for our kids to be able to interact with those kids will humble them, which is exactly what they need, and will help these kids realize I can sit at the same table. Actually, I could totally hold my own with these American kids from Greenwich. And the STEM part came in because,
putting them on that.
Yeah.
No, you keep going.
Oh yeah, no. Then the STEM part really came in because that was what I didn't see happening in school at the time. Now the pendulum has swung wildly, right? So it went from no STEM, only like, math and language arts and reading, to all of a sudden all STEM. And I'm all of a sudden advocating and saying, hey, wait,
right.
What just happened to the humanities?
Yeah.
But at the time it wasn't there, so it was filling a need. And I thought, okay, how can we get kids to collaborate on stuff that's really fun and interesting to them? And I just noticed, I did all kinds of focus groups before Level Up started. My kids' friends at some point knew to like kind of walk the other direction when they saw me come in, because they were all focus groups. So it was all, hey, nope, I'm going to give you pizza, I'm going to give you candy, come sit here and tell me what you like about school. And every time the thing that they would, and I would always say, you're not allowed to tell me recess, and you're not allowed to tell me lunch or PE. And what they came back with were these project-based learning opportunities, the small ones that were coming up in school. And I thought, okay, if we're trying to get kids to be my kids, really, because it started because I wanted it for my kids, more curious, and the kids that I was working with, more curious, more empowered on this side, more empowered on that side. And to really, again, like democratize access to the education that these kids need. And that's where it came from. Very convoluted thing, because it was all over the map. A bunch of different influences that just kind of came together. And, when we launched it as an after school class, because it didn't actually work out that we were able to do it during the school day, we launched it as an after school class because it was easy. And, I wasn't thinking that anything really would happen. It oversubscribed by a rate of 3. So we had to actually, we ran 2 classes, but there was a whole other, group of kids that we just couldn't serve. And I thought, oh, wait, this is weird. It's not just me that wants this for my kids, actually. And there was a philanthropic angle to the whole thing because, again, my nonprofit background. So when kids took a class in the US, we took part of the money that they spent and made it as a grant to the teachers around the world so that they could actually deliver the class at the same time. So the philanthropy part came in because of the nonprofit background, and because, to me, it's about resources also. It's okay, it's not just about putting the information out there. Now we've got to make that information usable to different groups, and different groups are going to need different things to make that information usable. So.
Yeah, and I think, and again, this is going to connect to our conversation about sort of your current role and the exciting part that we're collaborating with you in Participate, which I'm so glad, because again, we've been talking now probably close to 8 years, so it's thrilling. Because I think part of what was really great when we spoke originally, and it was, it's always great when your sort of dreams, like our technology wasn't quite where our dreams were, and so finally the timing is right. But the idea that you get kids really making collaboratively, because I still think that the virtual exchange piece is still ends up being sometimes can be a surface experience, and teachers never get below, sort of dig into, oh, my kids are so engaged, and like, how do you actually get kids sort of collaboratively making, and also putting them on that level playing field? Because if it stays at a surface level, especially in the situation like where you are having maybe more affluent kids and kids in areas that they think are still developing, you can't just do that surface experience. You will still confirm, I think, a worldview that is super problematic. So talk a little bit about that in terms of, like, it just seems you have a passion for kids making. And I guess now we're sort of in the project of, like, how do we have teachers kind of support that?
Yeah, well, I think it's about agency, right? So the one thing that I saw that impressed me about BitSpace is that so many of us talk a lot and really feel strongly about kids having agency over the world and over their learning. And sometimes there's a frustration expressed around, well, why aren't they grasping hold of these opportunities? And it's really because oh, well, one, they weren't real opportunities. They had all of these, you know, guardrails around them. And it was really something that we're trying to get them to do and trying to help them feel like, oh, you had a choice in this. But really, you didn't. I had a lesson plan, and I'm trying to actually make you feel like you had a choice in picking this lesson plan, and they can see through that like miles away, right? So the act of making, what I found is that that gave them real agency. They were really allowed to be creative. It was really technology that wasn't really being used in a lot of different ways. It was new. It did level the playing field in a lot of ways, in that, okay, the kids that we were working with in the US or abroad, none of them had worked with 3D printers actually before. So yes, maybe they had tech skills, right? They had the, you know, they knew how to work a keyboard, they knew how to work a mouse, all those kinds of things. But that stuff came really fast with all of the kids. And then it really was new material that they were like delving into and playing with. So I think making, and especially what I see at BitSpace, is that when kids make real things with real tools, that's when, and you really do step out of the picture enough that you're just there to provide guidance when they ask you for it, there's something magical that happens in that mix that's unlike anything else. I mean, they feel that sense of confidence that they've actually done something. Yeah. And I think back at in the Level Up Village days, we were really just getting to the design cycle and just starting to use words like iterate, right? And so enamored by the technology. So like, for example, the 3D printing thing, right? So enamored by this thing, and oh my gosh, it's gonna chip. But the printers that we used then are not used flat out. They're not used now. There's whole different kinds of printers that are out now that are much better. And that will continue to keep going and going and going, right? So it never really was about that printer. And what I understood fast is that actually, because of the constraints around it and how long it takes to print something, I don't know if you guys have ever tried to 3D print something, but it takes a long time to print anything, even something really like small. And especially the ones that are used in schools now, right? They get these little tiny things. So they're making tchotchkes, essentially.
Right.
And then we say to them, iterate on your tchotchke. And they're like,
what? I'm like, I'm done with this. Yeah.
What do you mean? Right? And so we kind of did a little bit of a disservice, I would say, in that at that moment, it was 3D printing for the sake of printing and for making these little things. But actually, when you look at this, like, well, why don't they really want to iterate? Why don't they feel a sense of agency? Why don't they feel a sense of creative, you know, whatever, out of the box thinking? Well, it's because they're only allowed to print this tiny little thing. Or like if you're making a guitar, right? That's my favorite thing. If it's just out of cardboard and then you say to them, aren't you excited to iterate on your design? And I'm like, whatever, to get the grade, sure. But it's a cardboard guitar. Are you kidding? Yeah. Which is why with BitSpace, with the woodworking tools and like seeing them actually be able to take different kinds of things, take electronics, put them together maybe with cardboard, put it together with woodworking. Now they're excited to iterate because it's not about the one tool. It's kind of the same thing. It's where STEM came from. It's that cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary thing. When you make something cross or interdisciplinary, right, it feels like it's relevant and meaningful. And that's, I think, was the real thing, actually, that we were going for and that I see happening in everything that BitSpace does, because it's not about any tool for the sake of the tool. It's actually about, you know, like, what do you want to make? All right, well, now go back and, you know, think about what would you need to know? What's the historical precedence around how this thing was made? And what do you need to know to make what you're trying to make? And then the tool, right?
Yeah. So this is probably a good time to back up.
Take a step back.
Yeah.
I think, and could you, I mean, you've mentioned BitSpace. Why don't you give us
an
overview of what BitSpace is?
And also, like, you know, giving an overview of BitSpace and then how you found each other would be really great. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So BitSpace actually was founded by two co-founders. One who was an architect, is still an architect, and was a professor at that time. And I think both of these guys very, very able to see the forest from the trees, both of them. So Thomas Kearns, who was is the architect and the professor, one of the co-founders, really kind of saw this, what he was teaching his students in architecture school, and said, I could teach this to my younger daughter, who was, I don't know how old at the time, but young at the time. And this would, I wish I could get to these architecture students well before they actually walk into my classroom, open up the sense of possibility and opportunity, right? And so had this idea for a makerspace, basically, that would be youth only. And he ended up meeting Manoj, who is in the finance world as a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and was very influenced by the Steve Jobs book, and thinking about, you know, like this idea of Steve Jobs tinkering in his garage with his dad, right? And thought, oh, this thing tinkering has to come into play, and I'm not a tinkerer, but I want to do this. And he started making these little projects at home with his kids, and felt like not only were his kids transformed, but so was he in the process. The two of them met. BitSpace was born. It's basically started as two youth-only maker spaces in Chicago. And the only things that they were asked to do or held accountable for were parents, because parents were the customers at that point. Parents were coming in saying one of two things in some way, shape, or another. One being, get my kid to put their phones down or their screens down.
That's right.
And be more creative, please. And two, prepare my kids for the jobs of the future, right? There's like this fear factor around, oh, all this technology is coming out, AI is coming out, robotics are coming out, how automation is happening, how are my kids going to be? They're not getting this in school. How are they going to actually be competitive? So that's what BitSpace did, worked with kids, and there were no test scores that had to be met. There's no parent coming in saying, I want you to help my kid get a better score on their SATs, or I want them to do really well at Harvard, or whatever. That wasn't it. And so they were really able to be creative and take only those two things at the table, and really only watch for what are these kids really authentically interested in. Mm-hmm. When are the moments at which parents are coming back and saying, oh my God, my kid just spent, 2 hours making whatever, like a rocket ship out of all these things in the house instead of being on their phone.
Right.
Those are the stories that started coming back. So schools started coming to the table at that point and saying, what are you doing? Can we bring this on a field trip to you? The answer was yes. Can you show us how you do that? The answer was yes. So professional development started happening. Field trips started happening. We started doing after school classes in and around Chicago. And then I came into the picture 6 months ago. So as you guys know, Level Up Village got sold in early 2019. Something like that.
I know. We're in the same boat.
Right? I know.
What year is it? What
year is it now?
2020 is hard to forget, though.
And I started, which you're a board member of, Julie, but I started a nonprofit to bring kids together and collaborate with each other around math skills. Mm-hmm. And one of my other board members introduced me to one of the co-founders of BitSpace. And that's how it came together. And I really did think, and I have told them all this, when I was getting these kinds of calls happen a lot, and mostly people just want advice. And they tell you all these things. My company's doing all this amazing things. We've got, the secret sauce on unlocking creativity. And I went, okay.
Yeah.
Sure you do. And I visited, and within 20 minutes, I was blown away just watching these kids in these maker spaces in flow state. I mean, immersed in what they were doing and completely engaged with each other around whatever it is they were making. They were making very clear mistakes, by the way, and no one was jumping in to fix them. And I was thinking, I want to jump in and fix them. I want to pull that kid back from the table, roll up his sleeves. I want that girl's hair to be tied back. I mean, power tools, you know what I mean? But no one was doing that. And I realized, the precursor to agency is trust, real trust.
Right. Yes.
And that is what I saw happening around the room with these kids. The kids felt it. they really were unlocking creativity in kids. And that's why I ended up joining, because I just went, you do have some secret sauce. What is that?
Right. And what do you think? I mean, I know the answer to this, so it's slightly, cheating here, but I mean, what was their motivation to search for you? I mean, they had this kind of successful thing, right? They had these maker spaces. To a certain extent, Chicago Public Schools knew about it. Obviously, Chicago is like the mecca and hub for informal learning. So what made them kind of search you out?
Scale. They wanted to take what they were doing and scale it nationally. And I, when I kind of came in and saw what they were doing, the very interesting thing is that, and having been at Level Up Village and, done this myself, so I can say it now because the company's sold. And so, but, oftentimes
freedom.
Oftentimes, we were only 2 lessons ahead of where whatever class we had just sold out was. And a lot of our resources went into, yes, building the program, but also really sales and marketing, right? BitSpace, complete opposite. I mean, they have gone all in 5 years on programming. It's not a flying the plane and building it at the same time. When it comes to programming, no marketing, no sales. And they had gotten to 6,000 students in 100 schools. And so clearly, some of the stuff was actually almost happening inexplicably without systems in place to do this, right? But it was happening, and it was the quality of that programming. And I think that's been the real magic for me as I've kind of come in, because I do have that sense of, all right, you guys have done this incredible, I keep describing it as a funnel, right? Like incredible programming that is delivered by people who have gone to architecture school or have gone to design school, and they love kids. That's the guides at BitSpace. And so they've understood and picked up, like classroom management skills almost. And now we have teachers at the table and educators that have played both roles, have been in maker spaces and are maker ed experts, and are now coming in and helping us scale this out. But really what was happening was no one was stepping back from the technology. In this case, everyone was stepping forward. That's what they went to school for. They weren't afraid of any of the technology. And again, they love kids. So this was like a sort of match made in heaven for that. That intense work that was happening like up here at the top of the funnel, delivered by their people, I then saw, okay, then they have it, what's the best parts of this that we can now systematize and make it effective for a teacher to go out and deliver. And that was really the next line. So that was the PD that they started doing in and around the Chicago area. And some of it was collaborative with the guide, and some of it was, we'll deliver the PD and now you'll go out and teach. Yeah.
And what were some of again, we were so absolutely thrilled when you reached out. I mean, this is just a small thing. Obviously, BitSpace has a wonderful community practice that we launched, and you're working with our great colleague, Allison Violet, helping you. So I'm just curious, like, as you came to us thinking, knowing kind of the focus on community practice, and that we are very focused on the educator, what you felt, what the experience was like for the educator in BitSpace's initial programming, and sort of where you want that to head as you scale.
Yeah, well, I think the community part of it has been really, really important, I would say, all around, right? So, I mean, it comes from a lot of the culture, a lot of like values too, right? So it's this idea of all ships rise together, but then also we are more than the sum of our parts, right? So as I heard challenges coming from the marketplace, both from Level Up and when I got to BitSpace and in between, because I get to talk to teachers all the time, and the things that teachers are saying are, yeah, we know that the education industry needs to undergo a revolution. We're actually in the middle of it and at the front lines of it. And we're trying to make all of this stuff happen within the constraints of the system that we are in, right? And I have so much respect for that. And some of the things that they were saying were, I don't have support from an administrator, or I have some support from an administrator, but it's not really. I mean, really the thing is I need to raise test scores. And sure, sometimes I'm allowed to be ultra creative in my classroom, but I don't necessarily have that support. Other people aren't doing it in my school. It's too expensive, right? And this idea of tribe really started coming at me around, you need your tribe, not just from just the regular human standpoint of we need our tribe. I think there was some study that came out that said, I could be wrong, but it said something like loneliness is killing as many people as smoking, or something like this,
Yeah.
right? Like this epidemic of loneliness is there. So this idea that we need to find our tribe, but then also that the human propensity towards expansion, right? Like I think humans in general want to expand. The universe is expanding. You have musicians who play alone but love playing in the orchestra, and we as humans love seeing the orchestra, right? And so my thought was, how can we take these musicians, each in their own classrooms, and create an orchestra for them where they can actually feel a part of a whole, and also pull from each other and iterate and become more than the sum of their parts, right? More than what we are giving, they will give to each other. How do we do that? And, do it in a way that's first of all, doesn't have such a huge expense associated with it. Yeah. So it would have to be online.
Yeah.
It would have to be online. And second of all, take into account, sometimes we think we're the only ones because we're not getting out there in the world to say that, oh no, actually so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so thinks that, but they just aren't in my school. And maybe they do, but they haven't said it yet, right? Right. So how do we bring all of that together so that people really feel supported, regardless of whether there's an administrator or a school board or a parent or whomever that supports where they already are? And that's why community, this idea of community, was so important to us. And finding some kind of a system that would allow us to deliver content that we think is really, really good. It's come from all of the work that we've done, but is also humble enough to understand that other people are going to take this, they're going to it is that maker mindset, tinkering mindset, right?
Yeah.
Go out, play with it, come back to the table, tell each other what worked for you. Don't even worry about the BitSpace stuff. Just tell each other what's working for you and be your support. Grow bigger than where any of us, definitely BitSpace, but any of us could have been by ourselves.
Yeah. And I mean, in terms of challenges for educators, beyond sort of what you described, which is right in terms of these sort of systemic barriers, I'm just even thinking about adult learners, right? Like in terms of them taking risks, them playing with things that they're afraid of, them feeling like, again, not kind of in command. I'm just curious about a BitSpace approach there, both in the in-person learning experiences, but also kind of what you want to build online to get them to take more risks like that.
Yeah, so I think, again, it does come down to part of it being the community, right? That support from other people. This people would hear from me and hear, oh, you broke your 3D printer? I broke mine 5 times, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, you really, like you're really stuck, you're really mad? Yeah, me too. I was there as well. And so sometimes just that sense of camaraderie around that is important. And I think that was something that we really, really wanted to respond to in building community and tribe, but also this idea of change, right? Like, how do you actually foster change and build new habits? So what we do and what we've taken is the science around the human condition that's been studied so much around how do you build new habits, right? And part of that is being able to discuss it with each other and having accountability partners, which we're hoping happens inside of the community. Yeah. And part of it is around the tools that we've put together that are not necessarily maker-centric tools. We have those also, and we have the how-tos and all the rest of it. But things around, okay, well, you also need to now consider how do you actually address the fact that you have too much to do? Well, you're going to try and hit several standards at once. Here's an idea of how to do it, but go back out and ask each other, how have you hit several standards at once? The second thing that we were really thinking through is like the what not to do, right? Like, how do you clear your plate of what do you have to let go of in order to bring this in? And that too is around the science of forming habits. You've got to think about that part of it. So there's tools around change management and habit forming. And then there's also the how-to materials around, yes, using the tools. Yes, here's some, here's the philosophy and the framework that we've seen really works. One thing that we have gotten some conversation around is this idea of empathy. So the design cycle starts with empathy, right? But, and empathy is, that's why Level Up Village was born. That's the thing that, everybody at BitSpace cares about. But that design cycle looks linear. And when you talk to a kid or you see that a kid's doing a project in school, they jam that empathy part down your throat, whether you care about it or not. So
you'll be empathetic.
Yeah, but it's, could be like my kids did this butterfly project thing.
Yeah.
And one of my kids is like, I don't really care about butterflies. And now I think that's weird, but whatever. And, and so because it was the whole project was on butterflies, that's the part that lost him to begin with. Mm-hmm. However, if there were a system that really took into account where a kid is really, right? And just said, all right, well, how could we solve for this problem? And it's, pods, how do we build these pods? And that's what my kid liked. If you had just started with like that instead of the empathy part, you might have actually gotten more engagement all along the way, and the empathy would come. It would wrap back around and come.
That's right.
So, finding the hook.
Yeah. I think every teacher has that sort of instinct, I think, of like finding the hook a little bit. And then some, I think, because of this sort of time, this just manic feeling, understandably, of just not having any breathable space. I do want to mention that Eileen, our pal on the chat, is sort of saying that, the PLN, and I think you spoke to this, which is, she was afraid of all kinds of technology, right, Eileen, until you started to connect with others. And that's when, and I think that's like that human need, which is, I'm not alone in this. There's other people that are also facing this. It's not so scary. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I love the 3D printer example. First of all, I love the visualization of the community as an orchestra.
Yeah, it's so good. It's a great metaphor. Yeah.
And then I think it reminds me of like one of the early stories of the early communities of practice was the Xerox repair people, the folks that were having to go out into the field and like here's what you do when you find a squirrel inside of a Xerox.
Yeah, we bring that up all the time because I think we've been talking about communities of practice in education for all the time, but really sort of the business case of it was, again, it was around a big piece of technology that could be very expensive, and then how do you sort of like, again, manage when stuff goes wrong, Yeah.
How do you manage when stuff goes wrong? So that's kind of the other thing that I was just thinking when you were talking about why the impetus behind putting this together online, on Participate, the online modules that we have that are the professional development modules. This also comes from, there's such a big difference between, and I don't play soccer, but my kids play soccer, but there's such a big difference between sitting and being a soccer fan and watching a game and having played it and now watching the game, right? And I think that teachers are trying and are on the front lines of really bringing this maker mindset into their classrooms, but they aren't necessarily getting to play the game themselves, right? And through the communities of practice that are online, they actually are now able to play the game themselves. And how is because they're taking bits of curriculum, they're trying to make it cross-functional, they're trying to solve for whatever they're trying to solve for. They're using that maker mindset, and then they're collaborating with each other and hopefully iterating on each other's ideas and being very good at curating, right, and critical thinking. So I think that the communities are giving them an opportunity to become players in the game that they're trying to teach, actually, too.
Yeah. so I have another couple of questions though. So what do you think? So given that the makerspace movement, has been happening, there's still obviously a lot of makerspaces out there that are sitting kind of unused. I'm just curious about, we're starting a little bit of a segment of Ask Me Anything. So I think I'd love to I'm going to ask you anything, Neesha, which is if you were a school, and I think this will be super helpful as we send out this recording, that either has a makerspace that just sort of landed from outer space, maybe some PTA raised money for it, or it got donated, or you're thinking of building it. What are some lessons learned in terms of taking something that was originally designed for an informal program, right, after school, summer? What are the sort of lessons learned in terms of building this into the curriculum? And I think you mentioned standards, but other what would be some other how-tos you might recommend?
Yeah, so another one is that I would try and bring all teachers in to play themselves, without a lot of purpose behind it. So without putting the requirement of, because you need to do this in your own class. I think first it's just play with it. It's pretty much what happened to me when my friend dropped this 3D printer on my table. He basically said, once he got past this idea that I didn't want to build it into any kind of curriculum, he said, fine, we'll just play with it then. I don't care. And left, right? And I think that was so helpful, this without pressure, just play. And that, I think, starts to get you more comfortable with the tools. And then creating some space, whether that's an actual, 10 minutes during your meetings that you're having with teachers, or it's a newsletter that's going out, some way for some teachers to be able to start talking about how they are using that space. Yeah. I think there's usually going to be one or two people that are way in on the makerspace. And it's hard to get other people involved. So I think allowing them to share their stories of how they're using it, and trying to create an atmosphere in which you really are able to say, this didn't work, right? So we talk about risk taking and failure and fail forward all the time, but teachers aren't always given the space to do that kind of thing. They're told, you have to teach this, but then they're not actually able to do it. So, giving people sort of that space. And the other thing is that I've seen is that creating ways in which you can pull it back into your classrooms and not having to go out, right? So it's kind of this idea of PE, right? So PE being the standalone thing that happens only during PE. A lot of what's happening with makerspaces is that it's some teacher that's in charge of the makerspace.
And you just, it's like the old library model, yeah.
It's the old library model, exactly. It's exactly, right? Or the old computer lab model.
Yeah.
The computer labs have been taken apart because first they went on those laptop carts, right? And now they're one-to-one with devices. Same with this maker mindset. We've got to get it into the mindset of everything that's, that one-to-one model. How do you mirror something like that? And I would say that, and this is a strange thing to say, but it's not about the tools. Actually.
Yeah, right. I mean, we've been saying this for decades now.
Yeah, it's such a weird thing because I love the tools and I think they're really cool, right? I definitely think they're really cool, and yet there's so much that can happen when you're talking about like old school things like woodworking, right? Yeah. And being able to pull that kind of stuff into your classroom. So I would say like creating like bite-sized ways in which that are easy, that don't involve super, super, super high tech, to just bring the maker mindset in. And for those people that are leading a maker space, to think about it in terms of like, teachers do this every day. They're always solving for problems. So, kid XYZ won't sit still and keeps disrupting and blah, blah, blah. The teacher has gone off to think about, how do I problem solve around this? How do I iterate on these ideas? How do I now, what are the design features going to be? We call them design features, but for them, they're like, oh, this worked. I'm going to do this again. They're already doing it is the thing. And I think not separating it so much is a big, big, I would say.
And Eileen, I mean, I wanted to, Eileen, this is a really great question, and I'm just mindful of time because the hour has completely flown, which is so great. But this is really an interesting question. Eileen is wondering about makerspaces with kits that have, bots or other items kids build. Is it really if there's a set of directions already? And I think we've all had these with like Legos, like remembering Legos when we were a kid where you just got a box and you built anything with, other where you have a kit. Like, do you think that's design thinking? Like, what's the role of those kits,
I think that those are good guardrails. I mean, to me, that's almost like asking, is a tricycle riding a bike?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, right? And if you see an adult with those, the training wheels still on, you might kind of go, what are you doing? Right? But at some point you let go of the training wheels, but it is useful to have the training wheels. I don't think you need to have them, but I've seen lots of kids jump on a bike without the training wheels and, parent pushing them along and then they go without it. So I think it just depends on your comfort level. Wherever you are, start there, actually, is what I would say.
Right. And then the last thing I'll just mention from the chat, and again, Eileen, thanks so much for your participation, is the teaching content. How do we have teachers understand, and I think the systems too around teaching habits of mind and other skills and the importance of play, which we've seen sort of really disappearing even in pre-K and K classrooms, and how critical that is to child development and human development overall. So we agree, Eileen, 1,000%.
Yeah, no, definitely I would say that it is play, right? And that would mean that you've got to be coming to the table with not as much of an overt agenda.
Yeah, that's right.
For these kids, right? Or maybe you're actually presenting it out to them, right? There's so much around choice and competency, and there's such conversation that's happening around what does competency look like, and what's the role of choice inside of that. And so I think, the opportunity for kids to play with tools and for them to come back to the table and say, oh, actually, I need to learn those two things in order to make this one thing, is another really big thing. So that's I would agree.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Neesha, you've got there's a BitSpace course in the BitSpace community called the BitSpace Approach to Design Thinking. Can you just give us an idea, folks in the community and join that course, what they could expect?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that that course is, we're so very excited about that course. It's free, like you said, and the BitSpace approach is kind of what I alluded to before, which is allowing kids to think about the maker mindset as an actual cycle, and there being multiple on and off ramps for it. So if you're not starting with empathy, but you're starting with an idea, you want to make a dancing robot. Why? I'm not really sure. Were you empathizing with anyone? I don't know, maybe yourself. Is there value in that? There is actually value in that, because the value is the mindset, right? And it's meeting kids where they are. So we've basically put together a course that's our take on how you meet kids where they are. Right. Actually, and what that process looks like, and hearing a lot from what's happening inside of education is, like, again, the biggest innovators are the teachers in the classroom. And so a lot of what seems to be happening are things like passion projects and maker fairs. And sometimes what happens in the challenges, then the kids will look at you like a deer in headlights because they don't know what their ideas should be, actually. So now you've given them all kinds of agency. You've given them choice. And my thing is, if you want to scare a teenager, I'll tell you how. Just put a blank sheet of paper in front of them and tell them to do something with that. They'll go, what? You're not going to tell me what to do? So a lot of the tools in that course are around creating that mindset before you even, if you're already in the middle of a genius project or something like that, or, your hour of being able to do whatever makes you passionate for a maker fair, a science fair, or an entrepreneurial fair, or whatever. There's tools inside of it around how you help kids build and flex those muscles as well. And then there's tools around change management and forming new habits, and being able to make space yourself for bringing this kind of innovative thinking into your classroom, which is, again, what teachers are doing all the time, and just building on it and hopefully fostering that sense of community and what we really, really hope is that teachers go out, they use the tools, they use some of the pieces of curriculum that are in there, and that they come back and they say, hey, I used this and here's how I made it better, or here's how I changed it to fit something that I was doing.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
Beautiful.
Well, we're super excited to keep going. And yeah, it's in the chat, right?
Yes. We'll share the link out in the notes afterwards, and it's in the chat. GoParticipate.com/BitSpace gets you to the community. Ben Owen's on here, just shared a comment as well. Ben, thank you. A great perspective that we have to keep emphasizing. I need new glasses. To create a true maker culture. The two of us are here like, oh my, this font is so small.
Oh man, He brought up Seymour Papert. Yep. What Seymour Papert have advocated back in the day. So there's some really great links, and we'll share those out after the chat. And Eileen asked around BitSpace materials in refugee camps, and I know Eileen is really thinking about that work. And so maybe we can connect after the chat. We'll certainly, and again, Eileen, if please come into the Makerspace community and continue that conversation with Neesha and her colleagues at BitSpace. And we can keep that going. That would be great.
Eileen's doing some great work with that.
So it'd be nice to connect that. That would be awesome.
So if people wanted to find you, Neesha, and ask you further questions or learn more about Space or learn more about, Maker Space in general, what's the best way for folks to get a hold of you?
Probably email. So it's an easy email. It's just Neesha@bitspacechicago.com. And through the Participate community is another really good way. I think another awesome thing is that the people who are facilitating that community are amazing. I mean,
I know it's so
with Sam, who's on our team, Andy, who's on our team. These are the people that are actually standing there ready to answer questions. And, I'm of course there too, but they're doing the doing all the time. And talk about being humbled by people. And the people that work at BitSpace and that are facilitating these classes are they blow my socks off all the time. They're amazing resources. So, and the easiest way to get hold of those resources would be to just join that community and talk to them. They'll talk.
Yeah, and please share out and everyone jump into those discussions. I agree. We're all there. So
yeah, absolutely. Just a couple of notes before we sign off here. So we've got a chat coming up on the 5th with
one. So now BitSpace is also, because you're part of the Chicago community, with Gina Grant from the Chicago Learning Exchange.
Oh, nice.
So yes, you have to. You and your team have to come back. And that will be in a couple of weeks. So that's pretty exciting. We love the organizations in Chicago Learning Exchange. You really want to promote that too.
Yeah. And as always, we'll send an email out with all the resources that were mentioned in the show today. We'll post those online as well. If you need to get a hold of Julie, she's at
Julie Keene.
And I'm at Mark J. Otter. We're at Participate, or participate.com. Just want to say thank you to Jane Violet, who's on for us from the mountains of North Carolina. And then just a huge thank you.
Neesha,
we're very grateful to have BitSpace as an amazing partner, but just excited to get a chance to work together.
We are too.
Awesome.
Thank you guys.
See you soon.
Thank you everybody that showed up today. Thank you for all of your questions, and we'll see you on the 5th.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, guys.